Hello, hello. Welcome to episode 31 of the Golden Question podcast. In today's episode, we are going to be answering the question why profits are so important and vital in an economy. And you could look at this even from a broader perspective why they are so important in civilization, in humanity, or important in the entire world as a whole. So I've been wanting to do this episode for a while. And basically we're seeing a lot of talk around now against profits. Now we're obviously seeing a talk against capitalism, and so people tie capitalism to profits, and so people tend to have a distaste for profits. They think that you're ripping off the consumers, you're ripping off people by implementing a profit, and they think that essential goods and services in an economy should not have profits. And so, what I'm going to attempt to do today is I'm going to explain to you, first of all, what profits are and what makes them so important in an economy. So, profits in the strictest sense is simply your added value. So, if I have a cost for all the goods and even services that I compile together, and then I create a new good or service using those collection of goods and services, the profit is the reward for correctly bringing those things together and forming them up kind of like a puzzle piece, putting them into a cohesive mass to form something new. And because I did that, right, based on my own knowledge and ideas that come up in my head, that's sort of the reward for sort of the immaterial thing that goes on while making things, because you can't tell a robot to just compile different goods and services and to make an invention, right? You can't tell an animal to do that. Only humans have the capabilities of inventing new things that aren't already there. And how do they actually facilitate those things, those imaginations? They have to take whatever's currently here and combine it in a way that produces whatever they're imagining. And so profit, again, in the strictest sense, is the reward for correctly allocating goods and services. Another thing that profit does is you could use it as a tool to gauge how well you've put up these goods and services, how well you've allocated the goods and services. So if I take two things that are very simple and that anybody else could do, and I combine them and then I say, here's my new thing, I'll have a low profit. And so that profit will tell me, you know what, I didn't really do something special. I took two resources and I combined them together, and I didn't really add that much value to it. And so the cost difference between my expenses and my costs versus whatever I'm selling it for, if it's very minimal, the difference, then I didn't really add any value. And so this is why people talk about a profit motive, is that it encourages you to actually create more value, to add as much value as possible as you can in an item. So if you see things that have very large profits, right, very large margins, it means that they're taking things that are very simple and they're converting them into things that have a lot of value. And so that's the reward that you get. And in this system, it incentivizes you to try your hardest to add value to something, to take something simple and add value to it, and to create it in a way that others can't create. Because if they did, then the profit would factor that in, right? If it's something that anybody else can do, my profit won't be as great as if it's something that I uniquely came up with, and it's very hard for someone else to duplicate it. So you have to remember that everything that you use to compile and create this new good or service has values of its own. So if I grab things that are $10 in value, $5 in value, and another thing that's $5 in value, that's $20 right there. Now, if I take those goods and services and I combine them, I combine them and I compile them to create a good that has, or that is worth $10, you could see what's happening here, right? I'm actually destroying value. Instead of creating value, I'm destroying value. I'm taking things that are more valuable and combining them into things that are less valuable. So I have things that are, 20 and $10, $5, taking these three things, combining them into something that's only worth $10, I'm losing $10. And so that's a loss. So that's why I tend to consider profits and losses as one thing together, right? Losses are just negative profits. So profits, again, you tend to think that, yeah, profits are positive by virtue of the definition. But I would also consider losses as profits as just negative profits. So again, when I refer to profits, I'm also referring to losses. So profits, again, gauge how well you've added value to something, and vice versa, how well you've destroyed value in something. So the more of a negative profit I have, the more of a loss I have, the more I've destroyed value. Now, you may ask, why is this important, right? Why do we need to gauge whether or not we've successfully taken goods of value and made them into something that's more valuable? And before I actually deter to that, I just want to go back to the added value aspect. Now, as we've said with the example, if I take something that's $10 and then another thing that's $5 and then another thing that's $5, $20, and then I make something that's worth $30, as we've said before, the $20 difference from the total sum of my costs versus what I'm selling the thing for, that again is the reward that I get for correctly taking those things and compiling them. Again, I keep saying I'm trying to say combine and compile, for combining them to create something of value. And again, this is something that requires thought. It requires innovation. It requires a human mind to compile these things and to structure, to have a system of logistics to create it, right? It's a long and complicated process. But eventually, when it does happen, I get my final results, and then the profit is the reward. So we have things that are of lower value combined to make something of greater value. And that's the whole point, right? You might ask, well, if we remove profits, right, I'll just have something that's of greater value. But you're not factoring in what took to happen or what had to happen in my head, right? I'm not getting rewarded for all my mental abilities into doing things. And this is what a lot of communists, a lot of socialists, the Communist Manifesto, people like Karl Marx, this is what they forget. They forget that, they just tend to look at the values of the things that I'm compiling. They look at the wages of the workers, they look at the cost of the factory, the cost of the materials, and then they say, why should there be a profit? Well, and they say, why should there be a business owner? Why should there be this class, this bourgeoisie, this class that rakes in the profits based on just allocating costs and labor and wages and everything that's already counted as an expense? Why should there be this added profit? And what they forget to factor in is the person who combined combined all these things. There had to be a mind working behind the scenes to make all this happen, because they think that if you just had the factory with people and with all the expenses, it can just create the good in and of itself. But what they fail to understand is how that process will get facilitated. How will that process merge together to produce this item? And how are you able to produce new items? And how did those things get together to begin with? So that's the part that a lot of, anti-profit people, that's what they forget. They forget the human mind aspect of the creation of this good or service. They forget what it takes for somebody to think of an idea, to think of an invention, and to create it. And this is where, that's why, when you look at socialist communist nations, big government entities, and civilizations that had big governments, there are very few inventions that take place once every, thousands or hundreds of years. Not thousands, that's a bit of a stretch. Every hundreds of years. And that's why once we freed up the system, once we allowed for profits, once we made a system more free, and we enabled it to be more market based, that's when we saw the greatest number of inventions in the shortest amount of time as possible, because we've allowed individuals to reward themselves based on the innovation and what their intellect tells them, right? The ability for them to use their brains to create things, to compile resources, and to reward themselves for it. Because if you remove the ability for somebody to reward himself for creating this new idea, why is anybody going to be compelled to do so? There is no incentive there. And so you have history as an example, right? We've seen the greatest number of inventions in the shortest period of time. I would argue, the 20th and 19th centuries, we've seen the greatest number of inventions. And again, I would argue once more that this process is slowly starting to decay, right? We're seeing a little bit fewer new inventions, especially in the past 2 decades. And this could be a result of this system again starting to bog down, right? People are now, we have sentiments of people uh, looking more negatively on profits, and more people trying to confiscate those profits. So you remove the incentive for people to create new things and to get rewarded for their ideas. And so that, right, you could observe based on how many inventions a society has, how free the society is, really how developed it is in terms of the economy, how whether or not it's sticking to this capitalist ideology, whether or not it's correctly limiting government and allowing individuals to prosper. So back to what profit could be used as, really the tool that I was mentioning before. Profits can also be used as a tool to gauge, as I said, how much value you've added. And you might, again, as I said before, you might ask, well, again, why do we need this tool? Why can't I just create value, and not make a profit? Or what makes the profit fluctuate? Why is that important? You need to understand that on Earth we have scarce resources. Again, everybody learns this in their living environment class. We have scarce resources, or resources that take hundreds and thousands of years to produce, right? Things for them to produce naturally. So oil could be an example, a lot of precious metals, rocks, things that take a long time to make. And even a tree could take several years to make. So we have, in the earth is obviously where we live in this material world, but the world that we live in is very limited, right? There's a limited number of atoms in the world, and actually a limited number of protons, a limited number of neutrons. And so, I mean, I think it's Isaac Newton's third law. I'm not sure if it's third law, it's one of the three laws, but its energy could be neither destroyed nor created. And again, you could expand energy to just include all atoms and proton and subatomic particles. You can't create these things. There's a limited number of these things. And so translate that to the earth. The earth has a limited number of trees, a limited number of rocks, a limited number of clouds, a limited number of atmosphere, a limited number of space. So we have all these limited resources. Now the question is, how do we best allocate these resources so that everybody can benefit? And capitalism attempts to solve this dilemma by instituting a market, by, again, using profits as a way to gauge, as a way to reward someone for taking these scarce resources, right? These scarce resources, and converting them into a good that somebody could use and somebody values. Because a lot of the times these scarce resources on their own are not valuable, right? On their own, right? If I have just a rock of iron standing on my desk, that's not going to do anything. But if I can morph it into a sword, then that could be used. So you're taking these scarce resources, which alone on their own, they hardly benefit anybody. But once I add value to them, once I combine two or more of them, or manipulate one, I'm able to add value. And profits right there adjust for that. So if there's some things that are very rare, if there are some things that are very rare and there's a very small number of it, that thing is deemed to have a higher profit because of how rare it is. Now you might ask, well, that's not fair. Why isn't it cheap? Well, if it's cheap, then everybody would consume it, and then that scarce resource, would disappear. That's it. It's gone forever. So again, back to our example, right? If I take something that's um, $10, if I take something that's $5, and I take something that's another $5, that right there has a value of 20. Presuming that, again, as is everything, those are scarce resources. If I convert them into something that's less valuable, then I completely wasted the value that was already present on the earth. So those things were more valuable before I even did anything to them than when I combined them into a new product. And so losses punish me for taking things that are more valuable, that's on the earth, that's scarce, right? Once I use these things to combine this new good, 99% of the time it's impossible for me to once I see that it's not selling, let me rip it up and then let me build a tree back, or build a bring them back to the original goods and services that were natural from the earth. And so profits help us best utilize these scarce resources, and again, the term is to best allocate these scarce resources. And the example that I always like to give is the person who makes leather shoes. So if you have somebody making leather shoes, and right, there's a lot of parts to making leather shoes, right? You have the labor of individuals who had to sacrifice their own time and effort into putting together this shoe. You have the factory, which has metals, the machinery used to stamp the shoes. You have the machines which have metals in them that are scarce in the earth, and let's presume that they modify them in a way that is irreversible. And then we have the leather itself that comes from cows that need to be killed and be made into shoes. If I were to sell that shoe and make a tremendous profit, it's essentially the market telling me, you know what? Keep doing what you're doing. We want it. We want more of it. It's very valuable. You're taking things like cowhide, which there's really no use for it. And let's say in this example, there was no alternative use for it. We have all these metals again. Let's pretend there's no alternative use for it. And we have these people that are just sitting there doing nothing, that now they have a use for them. You're taking all these three useless things and you're combining them to make something that's useful, right? A shoe. And so profits right there, if my profits are really high, it's essentially a massive reward for people telling me to continue what I'm doing, right? They could actually come up to me and say, thanks for doing what you're doing. But an easy way, a non-biased way of somebody telling your business to keep doing what it's doing, you're actually doing a great job, is to look at your profits, right? It's to look at the market mechanism that's set in place. And that is, hey, I'm making a lot of profits. Therefore, the market is telling me, keep doing what you're doing. Keep doing what you're doing, and don't stop. Now, if I were to flip it, if I were to all of a sudden start making losses, then that means, right, two things. First, it's the market telling me, stop what you're doing. We don't want any of it. It's not worth the value that you claim it's worth. We don't want any more of it. Stop what you're doing, right? So that's people indirectly saying, if there's people not showing up to your store and buying your stuff, it's again a sign that people don't want it. They're not actually walking by and saying it and telling you directly we don't want it. It's a very unbiased way of the market saying, you know what, we don't want your whatever you have to offer. Stop what you're doing. Do something else. Now the loss also means that I'm taking these scarce resources, the hide of a cow, right? A cow takes several months to develop, and there's obviously a limited number of cows. There's obviously the metal in there. Let's say there is no alternative use for the metal. The metal again is limited on the earth, and the labor of these people, right? They could be doing other things. And so if I'm selling the shoe at a loss, right, that's a sign that I'm wasting these resources, these scarce resources. I'm taking them, which they have a value of their own, and then I'm taking them and destroying their value by morphing them into this new product that's obviously irreversible, right? I can't take the shoe and reverse back and give the hours and labor back to my people, to the workers. I can't extract the metal back, get the use back out of the metal, and I can't extract this back to a hive, obviously, and form a new cow with it. So I'm taking scarce resources that obviously have value in and of themselves, and I'm destroying their value. And that's what losses are, right? You're taking the costs, the value of your costs, and you're actually deducting value to form the new product. And so again, profits, as I said before, are just losses, are just negative profits. So when I say profits, I'm also referring to losses. So profits are also a tool to tell you how good you're allocating these scarce resources. So, moral of the story really is when anybody comes up to you and says, we should ban profits, we should get rid of profits, you should ask them, right? You care about the environment. How should we allocate these scarce resources on the earth? And that's the problem. They believe that everything should be free, right? Everybody should just be forced, right? Technically at gunpoint to start working. And they should produce these goods and services and start offering them for free. Anybody who shows up can get something. Well, that's the worst way to distribute scarce resources in the earth, right? People are no longer going to make wise decisions on what to buy and what to avoid. And if something's rare, they should consume a little bit of it because it's obviously an expensive item. All that goes in the waste bin, right? If you get rid of profits and technically you make everything free, then I might as well squander a bunch of or as many rare resources as I can before anybody else does, right? And this is this hoarding mentality where, there is no incentive for somebody to save. They're just going to consume as much as they want. And this is I've been debating someone on this on healthcare. And so he's saying that, hey, healthcare should be free. Anybody should be able to use it. Well, the problem is when everybody just piles in with healthcare and they start using it for very little things that they could honestly do without. They start bogging down the system, right? Everybody rushes in to use to use the healthcare system because it's free. Even though they have a little cut, they're going to go to the healthcare system and demand that a doctor looks at them, and they actually make it harder for other individuals who do have real health problems get the help that they need, because there's a bunch of other people that are not wisely using, again, a scarce resources, a scarce service, such as a healthcare industry, because there's a limited number of doctors, there's a limited number of tools, right? And it ultimately comes down to the scarce natural goods that the earth provides us with. And so you have people using and abusing something that's free. And this is the most inefficient way of allocating scarce resources, and that is providing it by letting government provide it for free. That is the most inefficient way, because you end up destroying all the goods and services on the earth, especially the scarce ones, because those are the ones that matter. Those are the ones that we need to be careful about using. And we need to try to, facilitate them in a way, divvy them up in a way that only the people who need the most can get them. And that's honestly, again, I don't really want to talk about it this episode, but we could just, hint at it. That's where prices come from. If there's a good or service that I want to provide, I need to know who really wants this good and service, and whoever's willing to pay the most should deserve that good or service, right? If I'm selling something, and two people come up to me and say, "Hey, we want it," I mean, who can I give it to? I only have one of it. I need to determine who I can give it to. So what I ask in return is, who really wants it? Well, both of them are going to say, I really want it. The other one is going to say, I really want it too. Now, if you tell them, all right, if you really want it, who's willing to give up the most for it? That's when I can give it to whoever is willing to give up the most of whatever they have. And this is, again, the whole idea that this is what, again, creates an economy, the whole barter system. Who's willing to give up the most of what they have for this good if more than one person wants it? And that's where prices come in. And so you have prices, which, again, all facilitates through profits and losses. So the whole idea of capitalism, the whole idea of the free market, the whole idea of profits is to allocate scarce resources that are available to us on the earth. And by allowing profits, you reward people for taking these scarce resources, arranging them in a way that creates more value than what the original resources can provide. Remove that profit, give something for free. First of all, it removes the incentive for people to allocate those goods those goods on the earth and make and add value to them, and they also deplete these scarce resources at a much faster rate. So for people who are debating about others or debating with others on profits, I would urge them to ask them, do they care about the environment? Do they care about, the resources that we have on this earth? If they do, then they should be for profits, because that is the only way for us to facilitate these scarce goods and resources that once you utilize them, you can never get them back, right? Once I take some goods and services, combine them into a new product, it's irreversible. So how do we best facilitate the scarce resources in the earth? That is through capitalism and the free market, and through the use of profits and losses. As always, thanks for listening.